Hey everyone, in this video, we're going to discuss reputation harm online. If you've got a few minutes, sit back and watch this video all the way through because it's pretty cool. We've got some questions from listeners and viewers, and I want you to know we listen to them all and we read them all. So let's check this one out.
Hey guys. Love your show. Quick question. What happens to a company's reputation after a data breach? Can it be measured somehow?
I heard that after a data breach, sometimes PR firms often get involved to help their reputation. What's their role? How does that work? Thanks for taking my call.
Okay, great question. And yes, so we're going to sit down with someone today that's got a unique spin on this like nobody else. In this episode, we're going to discuss reputation harm online, reputation damage that data breaches cause, how to measure risk, and how to reduce reputation damage from cyber attacks. This is the story of James Potter, founder and CEO of DSE, and how he is changing the world of technology as we know it. Come join us as we dive deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top technology leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. From the creators of Vigilance, the newest global technology newsletter, translating cyber news into business language we all understand. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our podcast episodes on Apple and Spotify so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. All right, well, welcome everybody to Cybercrime Junkies. I am your host, David Morrow, and we have a really fun episode today. In the studio with us is my always positive, always fantabulous co-host, Mark Mosher. Mark, how are you, sir?
Oh, David, I'm doing wonderful. This is going to be a great episode today. We got a full house. Tell us who else is in the studio with us.
Good to see you. And yeah, you brought a friend, didn't you, Mark? So so
it's my one and only, but yeah, I brought a friend.
That makes me feel great, Mark. Hopefully you're talking about
So sad but true. So in the studio also is our special co-host, Logan Potberg. Logan, welcome to the studio, man.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully one day I have an intro as good as Mark's, but
yeah,
we'll get there.
It's usually from the insincere things to say to coworkers app that I have here.
Very effective.
It's very effective. No, we're really excited about today's conversation. We have an industry leader in the cybersecurity space. So he's got a really cool story. He's had a lot of good experiences and some really good insight. It is James Potter, CEO and founder of DSE. James, sir, welcome to the studio.
Hey, happy to be here. I appreciate y'all having me on.
We're really excited about having you. So just a little by way of background, explain to the ladies and gentlemen your current role and what space DSE operates in.
Sure. So DSE is a cybersecurity firm, and we focus on Active Directory almost entirely. Myself and all of our architects have been using the technology since it's been around, 99, 2000 time era.
That's phenomenal. So when you got in, what drove you to get into Active Directory originally?
Well, before Active Directory, you had NT4.0 and all the other precursors, which were fairly limited in their ability to expand to enterprise. And once AD showed up on the scene, it was a game changer, right? Because suddenly you can have a globally replicating directory with no limits. One single directory, no longer do you have to multiply provision people all over the place. And it was going to be big, and I knew it was going to be big. And, here we are 23 years later.
Yeah.
So you kind of recognized it, jumped in right away.
Yeah. I got in while a lot of people had already spent like 20 years in the industry. So they're learning AD at, in their mid 40s. And a lot of those folk are starting to retire now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. So what kind of drove you into technology in the first place? Like what
Was there a compelling event? Was it a childhood dream?
No, that's interesting. I think it probably boils down to I just really enjoyed playing with computers from a fairly young age. And I grew up relatively poor in the Detroit area, so full-time college wasn't really an option for me. I'm actually a high school dropout.
Wow.
So all my education is certificates basically.
Yeah. Well, that's
I
you've
lost that bet.
yeah you've done quite well for yourself.
Like I can't complain.
Yeah, and you're in good company too within the technology space, because we hear about this all the time. People that want to break into cybersecurity, they want to break into IT, and they always kind of beat themselves up because they don't take the traditional 4-year route. And there's just example after example after example of how that is not needed.
Well, yeah. How many people we talk to that feel like they've got the imposter syndrome because they didn't go to school for 4 years, they didn't get a degree, but look where. And then next we always have to remind them, look where you are now, look what you've accomplished, look what you're doing, look at the impact you're making.
And we see a lot of that with our juniors as well. They're just getting into the industry. They have like a year of experience or maybe no experience and just a handful of certs. And they're typically very unsure of themselves. But this is where everyone starts.
Right.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. Well, and I think technology and cybersecurity is one of those spaces that, even if you're coming with a 4-year degree from a great university, but you don't have any experience, any internships, any home labs, any certs, like you're still not at that much of an advantage necessarily, right? Like it's one of those industries that it's really kind of proved to me what you can do. Like, is would you agree with that?
Absolutely. There's a real show me mentality. And I think GitHub's kind of interesting because it's a proving ground for that. Like people can point to their repositories and what they've done and how many commits they've done over the years and how active they are in what parts of the industry.
Well, I think it's like part academia, part art, and part passion, right? Like you got to have a big chunk of all three of those, really.
Absolutely. So let me walk you through this. Like starting your own company is no small feat, though. Like that's a big step. So you had experience working for some quite large consulting firms. I think weren't you with PwC, Ernst and Young?
And KPMG. Deloitte's the only one I didn't get to cross off my list.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you bounced around all of them, and then you went off on your own. Are those also the ones? Just as an aside, to go down a rabbit hole, are those also the ones that were all hit by Move It?
Well, once you get to a certain size, you're going to hit by these larger incidents. It's hard to avoid them.
I wasn't bashing them at all. I was just like, hey, you know what? You hit 3 of the 4. I think that so did Move It. So did Clot.
Coincidence, maybe.
And for those that don't know what we're talking about, like if for the business owners out there going, what are these geeks talking about? So they Move It is a file transfer program, very popular, used federal government, used at large hospitals, schools, governments, like across all industries. And there was a exploit there, and a famous ransomware gang, well-known ransomware gang, actually isn't even deploying ransom. They're just going in, gathering all the documents that are normally transferred, stealing all that data, and then just extorting their victims. But it's one of the largest breaches of the decade.
And that's kind of one of the new trends we're seeing. Like ransomware is difficult. It's harder to do than it ever has been. So if threat actors can find something compromising that has value, maybe you don't need to ransomware anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it gets back to that's a really good segue right there, right? Because you guys do a lot of threat intel at DSE. Like you have a global threat report that you've shared with us, which is really good, by the way. And you gather up all this from various sources. But some of the trends that you were seeing and that you're showing in the most recent one is kind of pointing in that direction. Like you're seeing a lot of these gangs. Like when you think about why they do what they do, it's financially motivated in large part for certain gangs, right? And if it's financially motivated and they can get equal amounts, if not more money, just by the extortion part, right? Then why do the technical ransom and have to deal with that, right?
Absolutely. The path of least resistance for all the monetarily motivated groups. And then you have the other groups that are more nation state level, the CCP size, and they don't care about money as much as they care about data.
No, and that's, we were just talking to a group. They were asking us, what was it, Logan? Somebody asked us kind of, well, what's the biggest, it was a healthcare group. And they were like, what's the biggest healthcare breach? And we said, well, one of the biggest ones was Anthem, right? Like the Anthem breach happened right here. And X amount of, records were stolen, and the street value of those records would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And then we asked them, so how much do you think it's sold for on the dark? And they were like $1 billion, $500 million. And we're like, zero, because it wasn't from a cybercrime gang, right? Like it was part of espionage. It was years later, the DOJ indicted 4 people from the Chinese military, their cyber corps, right? And they it was part of the OPM breach, the Starwood hotels with Marriott, and then the Equifax breach.
Yeah, Equifax was a big one that woke everyone up to, hey, go patch your Apache servers.
Yeah. Wow. Yep.
Hey, can we talk about that for a second? You, in your report, you have a lot of really interesting insight. Some of that you were talking in that threat intel report. You were explaining how, like, the percentage of the breach and what that was in relation to their gross revenues, and you talk about Equifax.
Yeah. So Equifax and Experian both got really nailed to the wall. If you look at their yearly revenue compared to the penalty and cost associated with that breach, it was like 2.5 years of their revenue just gone. Like imagine that happening to a larger company like Facebook or Amazon. Like, would they be able to survive 2.5 years of revenue missing?
There's no way. Or even go the reverse, the small to mid-size business.
Oh yeah, unrecoverable.
I wonder, do you see that as a trend? Is there like a margin, I guess, of financial impact versus organizational revenue? Do you see a certain percentage amongst all size organizations, or does it grow exponentially the bigger it gets? What does that look like?
Well, you have worldwide averages. So the worldwide breach cost is around 5 million. But if you zoom in on the US specifically, you're looking at about 9.5 million on average. And those are for just run-of-the-mill breaches. But when you see the ones that are showing up in the news, your Equifaxes, your Targets, so on and so forth, those are mega breaches. And you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars for those. There's not as many of them, but whenever one does happen, it turns into a case study pretty fast.
Wow.
And you can tell why cybercrime keeps growing. Like, it's so well funded.
Yeah, I mean, there's money to be made there for someone growing up in an environment that doesn't have any other better options.
But even a 9 million average, like, that's a big average.
Yeah.
And that's where it really gets me, that we talk to some of these small to medium-sized business owners and partners, and they think, well, we're comfortable with our risk appetite dialed in at this level right now, because if we get hit, we've got some reserves, we've got some liquidity we can take. No, you probably don't have 9 million sitting in the bank.
No.
You probably don't know how to do a talks channel and negotiate with Russians to get your information back, or to unlock your manufacturing platform so you can get back in business. So I don't know. That's why it always amazes me. But that 9 million, you're right, Logan, that really sticks out in my head.
And it's average, but still scary.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, even if it's a median point and it's or it's an average, that's still way up there. It's much higher than a lot of organizations imagine. And when they calculate that, James, like, how do they calculate those numbers? Like, what all goes into those numbers?
Cost of breach is a couple things. There's the initial cost of recovery or paying the ransom, repairing whatever the damage is. But then there's also operational loss. So for a lot of orgs, imagine you're down for 10 hours. What is an hour of operations? Now, what is an hour of operations during Christmas season?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, if you're retail, Q4 is where the majority of your money's coming from. It's a big deal. And then beyond all those things, it's also the reputational loss or the point in time loss from having to sell off assets of your company to recover from the event.
Yeah, this is something I've been digging deep into, and that is kind of like quantifying some of this stuff, because in no other industry, you know, like a leadership, a board, a CEO, a CFO of a small to mid-sized business, like their sales team is able to forecast things. We're able to look at numbers by quarter. You're able to assess quantitative metrics to everything. And yet in cybersecurity, with all the advancement, all the brilliant minds, like leaders have told me, like literally my cybersecurity guys go medium, high, low. Like that's all they can give them. like what? Like we can do better than that, right? I know we can. So how do we do that? Like what's your insight?
Well, there's several firms that do this and nothing else. It's their entire existence. The first thing is trying to figure out your chance of a breach in a year. And if you're a Fortune 100, Fortune 500, it's 90% plus. You're going to get breached. It's not something you're going to be able to avoid. And from there, you got to calculate the cost of the breach. And once you have the cost of the breach times your chance of breach, you can look at a cost over 10 years on average. And if you can do security for less than that, that lowers the chance of the breach enough to get a good ROI, then you have a good investment.
Is there a way to, I'm just thinking out loud, is there a way to apply maybe like an algorithm to garner a metric to the reputational cost damage that's done?
That one is very, very tough because each company is a little different, right?
Right. Now, and I asked because we had that law firm, David, remember we had that law firm, it was years ago, here locally to us, that had been they've been in business for like 50 years. Like everybody recognized their branding and their logo, their jingle.
They were founded back in the 60s.
Yeah. Like 6 months after the breach, because nobody wanted to go do business with them anymore because it was such a big public breach. So yeah, I understand completely the reputational damage. I was just curious. That would be hard, I guess, to apply something to that to figure out that metric. Because
it would really depend on the industry and the amount of trust that's required. Yeah, maybe something like Kroger or Fred Meyer's, you're still going to go to the same grocery stores, but a company like maybe Ashley Madison, that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, and that backs up a point we had mentioned earlier about Target. Like people still shop at Target. They still do pretty well, but everybody's aware that they were breached. But they had some other falling out, didn't they, James? It wasn't just the reputational damage.
Yeah, I mean, they got hit so hard they had to sell off their pharmaceutical arm. That's no longer a revenue-generating piece for them, and that's a permanent damage over time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why when you go shop at Target, you see like CVS or another pharmacy in there.
Yeah, they got a good deal on that one.
Yeah, because they're just paying for the rent and they get to collect all that. Was that a profitable asset of Target's?
Extremely profitable. And you can see that in all of their filings pre-breach.
Wow. Oh yeah. So when you're doing planning, right? When you're trying to prepare with an organization, large or small, for a breach, one of the things you have to have them consider is like, are you prepared to sell off your most profitable asset? Right? Like they're not ready for that for sure. Interesting. That's unbelievable. What else comes in when you think of reputational damage from a breach? What all? There's short term, obviously. The Google searches, the SEO harm, right? But then long term, you have that kind of loss of trust and loss of long term revenue. Is there like a cycle? Let's say like they lose 15% of their customers off the bat. Is there something you're seeing in your threat intel about like how long it's taking organizations to capture that back?
Again, I have to give you the consultant answer. It depends. It's very, very organization specific.
All right, that's what we tell everybody.
It's tough. Like for something that has a pseudo monopoly, probably not as much of an impact. But if you have options and they're convenient, that's going to be tougher.
Well, yeah, if you're a law firm, it could have greater and longer lasting than if you're a Midwest manufacturer of widgets, right?
Yeah, well, and because lawyers are in the business of trust, right?
Oh, yeah, good point.
Experience their skill, but also you trust your person, right? You trust your lawyer, right? You're giving them that attorney-client privilege. I don't have attorney-client privilege with Target, right? Like I don't. I go there for like good, like cheap shoes and back-to-school stuff, right? So that's a good point. Yeah,
It's becoming more of a problem in South America lately. There's lots of law firms that are getting hit. There's lots of law firms that are getting hit by hacktivists and ransomware groups because a lot of these law firms have very sensitive data on their clients that may have very strong cash businesses. And they don't want that information getting out because it's more than just a financial penalty for them. It's their existence penalty. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when you think about too, like some of the larger consultancies, when they get hit, or the larger law firms, they have so much information on like mergers and acquisitions and confidential stuff that's coming out that will have ripple effects into things, right?
Yeah.
And when these gangs get control of that, that's brutal. Let me ask you this, James, like in what you see, because you see a lot of it, and you operate mostly at that enterprise level. Are we getting to the point, because we see so many friggin' breaches all the time, are we getting to the point where, or are we already there, where we're not looking at whether an organization's been breached because we have to do business with somebody? Like my whole thing is I want to be able to buy a jacket without like it destroying my FICO score. Right. So if I'm going to do that, like, how, can I, like, I'm going to do almost every place I'm going to go has been breached, but I think I'm judging them myself personally. And I know this is anecdotal, but I'm judging them by how did they handle that breach? Like if they did okay, but they got hit by a third party vendor or whatever, and they changed their policy, like I'm still good with doing business with them. Like it's still fine. I'll give them my credit card. That's still fine. But if they really handled it poorly, when I think of really people that did not handle breaches well, I always think of Equifax. That's the first.
Like the poster child for did not handle well.
All that, like, oh, it was just bad. It just looked bad anyway from our perspective. But like, to me, are we getting to the point where there's so many breaches that people are looking at it like not whether you've been breached, but how you handled it or how well prepared you are? Like, what are you seeing?
I think the data is hard to find. It would almost be nice if we had kind of a credit score for these companies. So how trustworthy are they from a security standpoint? AAA, triple B, triple C, just like a food rating or Better Business, right?
Yeah,
that makes total sense.
Yeah, and public companies have it. Like you've got the Moody's rating, and somebody gets downgraded, right? And their stock, like all of that. Like why? That's really interesting. Do you think we're going to go there?
Yeah, do you think it'll ever get there?
It would inform some of my personal spending decision.
Yeah.
If I jump on a website that's not one of the major vendors, I'd want to see how credible they are.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we have like, there's scam advisors. There's things that when you're going to buy something online, and it's the holidays now, people are buying online, and I want to get that necklace, and it's not over here. It's not on Amazon, whatever. Like it's not at this jewelry store, whatever. And you go and you find some site, and you're like, all right, they have good images, but I've never heard of these guys.
Website looks cool.
Designer, right? Like, I don't know, but I'll like throw that site into like one of these scam things, and all of a sudden, like it lights up like a Christmas tree, and I'm like, well, I better not buy from them. Like, do you think we're going to get to that, not just for retail, but for other organizations? What do you?
I don't see why we wouldn't have that built into browsers, honestly. That's going to be something that I think the major vendors are probably already looking at.
Let's do that. Can somebody put James in charge of that? That's a really good idea. Have it right in the browser, right? Like have it right in your browser. Oh, I like.
But then you run, playing devil's advocate. If you're a newer business, now you have to buy into the system. There's extra costs. You're unknown. So how do you get that initial rating?
Premium features. Oh, if you want to be featured on the browser, it's going to be pay to play then.
Right. I can go down.
We just got to make sure it doesn't turn into the Yelp side of things where it's pay to get reviews removed.
Yeah. Yep. That's a real good point.
Yeah, that's brutal. You get a bad Yelp review, you're doomed. That's amazing. So what are you seeing? So we have a new czar of cybersecurity for the U.S. government.
Just elected. Haven't really dug in under them too much, to be honest.
Election. I did not get a vote on this. I did not get a vote.
Who were the other candidates? What were the other choices?
No, it's representative. He voted for someone who brought them in.
Who voted for them? Right. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, it's pseudo democracy.
Yeah.
Remember this from my political science days. We're not a democracy. We're actually a republic. So we vote for somebody who then votes. Okay, right. That's fair. Fair enough. Okay.
Remember, we don't do politics or religion, David.
No, I know. We don't touch that here.
Just like being at a bar trying to pick up a girl. I'm not going to talk politics, family, or religion.
Don't bring up that topic. So let's I'll edit that out. What are we so what's your take on this, James? Like, is it what is that role going to do? Apparently it's the second ever to hold that role. Who was the first one? And this
I couldn't even tell you, but they are shaping standards in an interesting way.
I didn't know. I felt bad. I didn't even know the first one. So
they released requests for comment. We actually filled out and submitted one of these about 2 months ago, I want to say, where they say, hey, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What are we not seeing in industry that people don't want to talk to the government about? And they open these open comments, and you could submit data, and it helps shape their policy. So if you're in the business and you see this, spend the time and submit the data because you have outsized influence through these submittals.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And they use that to shape things like the NIST policies, which then help shape CIS bench lines, which then make it into our corporate infrastructure through scanning and compliance.
Yep. That makes sense.
So the organizations that you guys are serving at DSE, what type of things are you finding that they need, or that you're helping them bolster their kind of cyber resiliency?
So a lot of the time it's kind of the same story. You have an org that's been around for 100 years, 80 years, and they brought in Active Directory in 2000, just like everyone else did. And it's a filing cabinet. And if you don't maintain it well over time, it becomes harder to use. You lose records. Maybe there's records in there that shouldn't be anymore. And maintaining it is a cost, one that's hard to justify. And it's becoming more and more expensive over time because, as we alluded to earlier, a lot of people that know Active Directory very well are rolling off, right? They're retiring, they're moving to Florida or Arizona, and they're calling it good. And new people aren't being trained in Active Directory. Entra and Azure, sure, but new people don't exist for AD because it's kind of regarded as this legacy technology. It's this legacy technology that's... Oh, no, that's fine. Very few large organizations are actually able to successfully do this. Lululemon is a good use case here. They attempted to move 100% to the cloud. They got about 90% there, and then all the gotchas came in. And now they're having to face this hybrid environment they weren't planning for, which is an extra cost.
What were some of the gotchas?
Well, I'm not directly in front of that. This is all kind of secondhand information. Lulu's not one of our clients.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about them specifically, but what are some of the gotchas in the industry that they could have seen is what I...
It's almost always applications. Applications that have been around for 5, 10, 15 years that are using legacy auth NTLM, for example, and you can't get rid of them because there's no alternatives, and they're generating revenue for you.
Yeah, yep.
And it's a lot easier to dev for NTLM than it is Kerberos. So devs will also follow the path of least resistance if there's not an active expectation that their code is going to go through security review.
Unbelievable. So, we've had some people that have been involved in like the triage, like the emergency responders to like ransomware breaches and things. And one thing I've taken from all those episodes, all those conversations is like people keep too much data. Like in general, organizations, they just keep too much freaking data. Are you seeing that? Like you're right there at the center of it.
Yes and no. It depends on the org. Orgs that have been burnt may change some of their policies. Examples might be removing email older than 30 days, not keeping chat logs over a week old, because the passwords are going to be there in email. They're going to be there in your chat logs. And if you parse them out quicker, you don't got to worry about what's in there as much. And it also can help for some aspects of legal discovery. If data's not there, you don't have to provide it.
Yeah, it's the plausible deniability, right? Like, oh, sorry, we changed our policy last year.
Becoming more and more common, yeah.
Wow.
And there's upsides and downsides.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because in some of the largest lawsuits, it's always that internal memo that kills you, right? From like
Google got nailed on that, yeah.
It's always, they always throw that up on the board in front of the jury, and you're just like, oh my God. Like, the poor guy's like, I was just venting, man. I was just venting to my buddy. And like, all of a sudden, 3 years later, it's like the cause of $100 million runaway jury. You're like, oh my gosh. So, wow. Holy cow. So, what are we seeing in terms of, we were talking about ransomware and the technical aspects that are involved, and you've got the FBI telling organizations don't pay, and so you've got all that, and some ransomware groups we know have like stopped asking for proofs or stopped offering proofs of life because that has been used on the other side just like as a delay tactic and stuff, but they still need proof. It's if they don't even ransom and they just go, we've got your stuff, like we're going to publish it, it makes it easier. Are we seeing a trend where more and more organizations, like trying to read tea leaves, it's the coming on the new year of 2024, and we haven't released any like predictions other than it's going to get worse. Like that's all I got for everybody.
Yeah, we've begun our 2024 threat report metrics, and so far it's looking around 20 to 25% more attacks than the year previous, and that's about what everyone kind of is expecting.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And are the TTPs changing at all, or is there any different? And that's like tactics, techniques, procedures that cybercrime gangs use to breach. It's
almost always. Let's look at the Ubisoft breach. So the threat actors, after they compromised an end user workstation, they looked at their Jira and Confluence data for months and months and months. They weren't doing anything to be detected by EDR, XDR. They were totally under the radar until they understood the network and security space better than the people actually running it. And once they had that data, they were unstoppable.
Yep.
I don't remember who got Ubisoft off the top of my head.
I remember we talked about it, Mark, when it...
Yeah. We've talked about so many since then. Well, I feel bad saying that.
That's all right. I'm sure some of the researchers that may be listening be like, you idiots, we told you who it was. Like the night we sent it to you.
That's what we get most. We get most of our intel from our listeners.
Yeah, and the threat actors are probably listening, being bummed they didn't get credit.
Right. You're going to have to repeat that.
That's why they did it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, remember that? As their avatar. They took his profile pic. Yeah, that's not a good look for us. That is not a good look for us. Yeah, sponsors. What?
Come on. So that's crazy. So what's up? What's next? What's on the horizon for you guys? What initiatives do you have in the coming year? What's exciting you about your business?
On our side, it's tool building. So right now, most of our customers are enterprise, and we haven't really been able to engage with SMB due to the cost of our consultants. So we've been trying to develop a methodology that will let us help SMBs while still being profitable enough to keep the lights on.
Yeah, because if you can scale your expertise, like that's what's needed in the SMB space, right?
Exactly. And a lot of our investigative work is very time consuming from a manpower standpoint, especially with larger, more complex environments. For smaller, simpler SMB style environments, we believe it's more automatable.
Absolutely. Because the environments, I mean, we see it all the time because we live in that space, but the environments are pretty much, oh, this is one of them. Like they can be grouped together, right? Like this group has no servers. It's all SaaS. This group has the on-site thing and then backup, like a certain thing in Azure or whatever. Like they're very, like there's maybe 5 or 6 flavors and that's about all we see all the time. So
beyond that, we're pretty excited about SpectreOps' latest tool release. They have, of course, Bloodhound Enterprise, but they've added an Active Directory certificate service analysis stack on top of that. Very interesting stuff.
Explain in English what that means, because that sounded really cool.
Okay.
Me, like I'm your nephew at the family thing, and I'm like, that's really cool, Uncle James. Tell me, like, what does that mean?
So you can kind of look at PKI as your secret passwords to get into your friend's cabin, right? Or hideout or whatever. You know, normally you have a password. They know the password. As long as your password matches up what they have, you can get in. And this is kind of what we're used to, having to type in a password and getting authenticated and all that. But the way this works is with a little key that you carry. And with this key, you can go around and it can open anything that is allowed to open. Now, the problem with that in an enterprise environment is often people get keys to open things they don't need access to, or keys that open keys, and so on and so forth. So instead of just having access to the hideout in your friend's backyard, suddenly you can get into a nuclear laboratory.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know we don't want somebody like Mark.
No, that's a bad idea. Lucky to get the keys to my own car.
Because we're seeing more and more threat actors being stopped by traditional tiered isolation that these enterprises are running. So they're looking for another path of least resistance, and this is almost always certificates. Because they're very poorly understood. It's another realm where it's hard to hire, because it's hard to find people. They're expensive. And a lot of them are rotating out, and new ones aren't learning the technology.
So CISA's stance and Forrester's research on zero trust, how can that play into all of this? And like, do you think we'll see anything come, because like zero trust, you can't buy zero trust out of a box. There's not like a zero trust thing you can get.
The vendors will tell you there is.
Yeah, good point, James. Good point.
And for those listeners, like, just please, whatever vendor you choose, always go with a holistic one. Somebody who's going to like listen to you, like find out everything, develop a roadmap for you, not like this one.
Not bring a box with some hardware, some gear in it to the first meeting.
Yeah, because you know, you go to Black Hat or you go to some of these conventions, and you can count the number of absolute phrases like social engineering solved, like
100%.
come on, like really, like, and then you meet guys with serious hacker skills that are like, challenge accepted.
They've got to have 0-day patches out.
And half the time they get through with like a flipper or something like that. It's like some toy, like it's just like some RF thing that they get, and they'll get right through. So how does zero trust play in? Like, can you walk us through? Because I'm sure you see this on a.
Well, it's huge, and zero trust is tough because it's timely and it's expensive. It's not something you can just install and roll with, and every org is going to have to implement it a little bit differently. Now, there's some key principles that if you follow will help improve your security dramatically, and that's tiered isolation, which has been around for a while now. So people haven't heard it before. Tier 2, you can kind of consider that as your desktop access, anyone that has admin on a workstation. And then you have Tier 1 access, which is your server admin access, your database admins, so on and so forth. Right. And in Tier 0 are the most critical IDs in your organization. Your domain admins, your SIR admins, and anyone that has the ability to influence those. And that's where this tiered isolation kind of comes into play. Because if you have like a Tier 2 account operator role that can reset passwords on Tier 0, they're Tier 0 now. So you have to isolate the abilities between those three tiers so they can't cross easily.
Yeah. Well, and what you're talking about are when you're at, like, let's say the desktop level, right? You have to basically re-authenticate, right, in order to get to the next level. You can't just like, oh, I'm in here. And we've seen so many breaches recently where somebody gains access to this person at this level of the organization, but they're able to escalate privileges all the way to the source code. Like, how is that happening? Like,
well, there's a few different methodologies, but it normally ends or begins, I should say, at a workstation. So you have a workstation that's email access, it has internet access. Assume breach. You can't trust that machine. You can't trust anything that happens on that machine. So if you have an administrator, say a server admin or domain admin, using that machine to do their productivity, daily activities, but then also using it for their administration stack, that's a huge risk. Because even if their machine's not breached, another Tier 2 machine at that same level can be breached. And once a threat actor does, they go and say, who's the domain admins, who's the server admins? They'll do directory calls for this. And then they'll go correlate to their workstation, compromise their workstation, and then elevate to Tier 1, or even worst case scenario, directly to Tier 0. But if you design your network in a way that Tier 1 and Tier 0 credentials can't actually log into those machines, you've prevented a threat actor's path to elevation.
Right. So how do you design it, though, where it doesn't interfere with the operations of the organization?
That's always the tricky part. Usability versus security, right?
Yep.
And every org is different here.
Yeah.
I got here's next quarter's report right here on paper, right? Like, but that's not going to be very efficient in business. And so
sure. There's a lot of different ways to kind of go about it. There's software solutions like CyberArk, right? Vault off the credentials, force everyone to do screen recording with PSM, dedicated CyberArk run jump boxes. That can get expensive for larger enterprises. Right. Very, very expensive and complex for smaller organizations. So one popular approach is either a separate isolated machine for doing your administration, called a SAW or a PAW, a security access workstation or privilege access workstation, and all the administrative tasks happen there. And in addition to controls at the desktop layer, you layer on network controls as well. So you say, hey, you can only accept RDP for the domain controllers from the Tier 0 PAWs. Or SQL boxes only accept incoming RDP from Tier 1 PAWs. And that limits threat actors' ability to manipulate those devices by compromising these Tier 2 machines.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's phenomenal. So when you, meant to ask you in the beginning, so like what was it like starting your own business? Like when you went from working for one of these larger consultant firms and you started your own business?
It was hard.
Were you driven? Did you always want to be your own boss, or what drove you to do it? Was it?
I I never really thought about it. We incorporated late 2019, so we were rolling into it right during COVID. So everything is remote, and I kind of blame that for some of our success, because I was still able to work while running the business at the same time, and that gave me a bit of a leap up without having to do that. Hey, you quit your day job and now do the business, and you're running through all your funding while you're trying to get it started up. I was able to just do 60 to 90-hour weeks, getting everything running. Now, the downside there is that's a lot of stress. It's a lot of work, and it certainly had physical ramifications on me. Acid problems, stress levels. I had a lot more hair 4 years ago. But
that's always a key metric, right?
Yeah. I finally gave up and decided I'm just going to be the bald guy with a beard.
Yeah, now it works.
That's it. That's so cool. Well, we will have links to DSC and to your LinkedIn as well. Any other exciting things coming up that you want to share with anybody? Are you speaking anywhere? You got any events or anything going on with the company you want to share?
Well, I have speaking arrangements coming up in Q2 and Q3. I was going to be speaking at FlowCon, but I have some surgery going on in December, and I'll be on some pretty serious narcotics. So they kind of advised me to not be in front of an audience.
Probably a good idea.
Well, I'm sure they appreciate that. Mosher shows up all the time like that.
Right. It's just the whole...
We're talking sports or Southern rock, and I'll just mute him real quick.
I'm eating Percocet like Skittles.
Yeah, he's eating Percocets like Skittles.
But we're looking to have our 2024 threat report out around Q2, and we're hoping around Q2, Q3 for our SMB offering from the security side.
Well, that's great. When you guys get that, please, if it's okay with you, if you're not opposed, we would love to have you back.
Yeah, that'd be excellent.
That is really a space that is near and dear to our heart, but it's also one that is really struggling with security today. Like they don't, limited budgets, and they don't need everything. They don't need all the bells and whistles that an enterprise do. But I think oftentimes we just see them being sold, some solutions. Sometimes they're like, well, we were sold this, and we're like, that doesn't work, right? Like, what can we help you with? Like, what are you going to do? Like, and it's really a struggle. So, we would love to have you back if that's okay.
No, happy to be here. Yeah,
that's great. Well, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. James Potter with DSC. We will have links and everything in the show notes. And we thank everybody for listening and watching. So thank you, everybody. And we will see you in our next episode, which will start right now. Thanks, everybody, for listening to Cybercrime Junkies. Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast, and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for joining us.